underpinnings on which they rest. International cooperation, by the way, we talked about exporting resources rather than accepting refugees. This is the principle of international cooperation in the 1951 Convention. So thank you very much for bringing this at the end to this very, very accessible level, but I have to say at the beginning was extremely interesting. Having said that, I will open the floor and the floor. Parastu is the first one to ask the floor.
Thank you for your lecture. I found it interesting that you made a distinction between the 1951 refugee definition, which is the sort of the narrowest definition, and then you talked about climate change and war, and you even referred to famine. I've always wondered about the distinction we make at all about between refugees and economic migrants, because when you were talking about rights and needs, and you also said some basic needs are also rights, and yet in the field of law we've chosen to privilege civil and political rights over things like social and economic rights, right? By sort of saying, yeah, refugees yes, but economic migrants no, even though the rights of the needs of economic migrants are sometimes as compelling, equally compelling, So I'm just wondering, in the end, whether these distinctions are arbitrary, how could we just sort of, I don't know how to express myself coherently, but basically how to sort of make an argument that really the most ethical thing is total open borders, and not to make these distinctions between.
Just I'll add to Parastu's question. He said that Cole said that there is a human right to freedom of movement.
Right.
So why should it apply to refugees only? And I think this is what probably Parastu said. If there is a human right to freedom of movement, then it should not be contingent on whether you're persecuted or not. I think this is the question.
Right.
We'll take another two questions and then Professor Mary will...
No, just go to this directly. I want always to be direct. Okay, I think that you got a real point, of course. Namely, if we subscribe to the freedom of movement, and that's an unrestricted, more or less unrestricted principle maybe in international law, I think you are more keen to this area of discussion than I am. Okay, then where's the problem? Okay, but the problem is, of course, it's not true that you have freedom of movement really as an international right. No, and it's not even an accepted human right. And that, of course, would again be some of the weak points maybe in Cole's discussion, because his first premise is freedom of movement is a human right, and as Wellman is not taking this human right in, of course he can skip his first premise by, as the human right of freedom of movement is not taken in by Wellman, his first premise restricted to legitimate states does not apply, because when a state is not applying the supposed human right of freedom of movement, he is not a legitimate state. And so the first premise of the amendment does not apply. That's the logic of the argument. But it's, of course, so we can only have a clash if we subscribe already to Cole's position, which I did just for the sake of presentation, not in reality. I don't subscribe to the principle that human movement is already a human right. But the question we should ask is whether it should be a human right, whether it ought to be a human right. Of course, in a sense of a restricted human right again. And here again, of course, we have to enter deep discussions. which are not yet entered by these two colleagues who are the top figures in the argument at present time. But thanks for your contribution.
The gentleman asked for you.
I'd like to thank you for this fruitful presentation. I'm researching migration, Syrian migrations, Syrian migration and adaptation in Egypt, and I'd like to ask about what should happen after they landed in. Okay, we have forced migrants who move from conflict places to safer places, supposed to be more safe, Germany, Hungary, Egypt, whatever. And what should happen next? Because okay, they flee their homes and they may find worse places in the host country. And this happened in Hungary. People, when they landed from Syria to Hungary, they had to move from Hungary to Germany and place at the borders, forced them or followed them at the borders. So we just consumed a lot of time on talking about exclusions and inclusions, okay, and what should happen next once they land in the country, in the host country. What about the effects of integration?
Yeah, thanks, of course, a very essential question, of course, for the present debate. And of course not just solved on the table of philosophers, because it's a really international problem. But I would say from the philosophical point of view, what I would say, we did not mention the principle of causal relationships. Who has caused the mess we have now? But it's again, I skipped it. It's on my files, but it was not on my spelled out talk. There is the principle of take in responsibility in relation to who has caused the mess, and who has caused or had contributed to the mess is of course in a different responsibility situation than people who did not who were not engaged in creating the problem. And when you apply this to Syria, of course, it's quite clear that some countries are more obliged to, let's say, take care of the refugees than just Germany or than just Europe. Let's just call it by name. Of course, the main aggressor in Syria, from my point of view, had been the United States. And some people being engaged as the so-called rebels against the elected government in Syria. So I'm not in favor of the present regime in Syria, but nevertheless I would subscribe to the principle that other countries should not intervene. And they did intervene in an indirect by pushing up the rebels. And of course, within Syria they are called terrorists, of course. But this would be another topic, and I'm very engaged in this field of terrorism, but that would be too much widened perspective, of course, for this occasion. But when bringing in this meta principle, we have in philosophy very easily, of course, that it's a difference in responsibility according to whether you had been involved in causing the problem or not. And when you were involved, okay, your responsibility is a bigger one, of course, which is not, of course, an excuse for not bringing in some help from the other sides. Because if it is a fact, and unfortunately it is a fact, that those nations who would have been obliged most do nearly nothing with respect to this problem. Of course, the other nations are not out of their weakened responsibilities. Okay, would you agree? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for your presentation. It it was very interesting. I do have a question, though. I wish you could explain a little bit further this idea of freedom of association of the state, because I have a couple of problems with it, and I didn't read the book, but perhaps you can explain it further. Firstly, I have a problem with the personhood that a state can take on when we use this word. It's not at the end of the day a person. It does not have a human right. When we're talking about refugees and we say they have freedom of movement, to me that makes a little bit more sense than when we talk about a state, which is an abstract entity, having the same personhood as beings who have human rights. So I don't really see the basis where we could argue that it does have a freedom of association, particularly it's also semantically being phrased in a way where it has a more positive tone than right to exclusion. It's freedom of something. And the only legal basis I could find for it is just this very basic premise that sovereignty is defined by the ability to define the exception and the right to exclude. But as far as I know, even within a legal and moral field, it is heavily criticized. So as far as I'm aware, I don't really see where good argument can come in for why a state would have either the right to exclude or freedom of association. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for this question. And you're absolutely right, I would say. And you're just introducing another distinction I would have liked to make if my time would have had more extension. You rightly alluded to and mentioned it already explicitly that the two rights, freedom of states' rights and human rights, are on a quite different level. Human rights are defined for individuals, or let's say individuals, of course, in totality as far as they are humans. And states' rights are referring to states. And there are no human rights defined for states. So we have rights of a different sort. Yeah? And when you are asking for what's behind this so-called freedom of association as a right, it is of course a very different thing. It just means that the community itself has to decide, and the right to decide on who is a member of the community or not. And of course the whole argument starts by bringing in this mentioned analogies. Whether somebody is part of a club or not, who has the decision to make? Yeah, the club has to make the decision. And so the club has the right of association in the sense of he has to decide of somebody applying or not applying. It depends on the kind of club we are referring to. Maybe brought in or not, but they have to allow to bring him in. No? It's not just by application. Facebook, of course, is another story. There you are a member, even a friend, a very strange kind of friend. If you are just a friend by applying for being a friend, I would never like to be a friend just by application. Okay, I would restrict my friendship. And I hope most people would. And of course, going to the example of marriage, of course you have the free choice, let's say, in the sense that you should not be forced to marry one you would not like to be your partner or your wife, in the case of that I'm a man, or the other way around, of course, as well. But freedom does not mean that okay, if another one applies to be your partner, you have to accept him, and you can't apply. You can't apply, of course, for marriage by making some offer to one of your friends and, well, would you marry me? Yeah? And of course, but she has the right to deny. And so the institution of marriage is just defined by the right to deny. And that's exactly the right of exclusion. Yeah? And this is exactly the starting point where the intuition is very much in favor of exclusion, of the right of exclusion. Of course, it does not follow from the right of exclusion that you must exclude. You are allowed to exclude if you like to exclude, but you need not exclude. Yeah? So even, and this of course holds even in the case of the right of exclusion from point of view of the state. He need not exclude, but he must get the allowance, and he takes the right for himself, of course. And as far as I'm informed, at present it's legalized. That decisions on membership of who is a natural German or not is up to the Germans, and they have delegated more or less this question to some commissions, and these commissions, of course, are checked by the government and by some state institutions. Okay?
We'll have, there is one more question. So, unless you make it, please, very brief, because we have another two to go. Very brief.
Thank you for your lecture, and thank you. I'm Syrian, originally Syrian, and I have many friends. And my brother and his family, they are refugees in Germany. So thank you for your country, thank you for your government, thank you for your lecture. I really appreciate what you have lectured, and really I think it came from your heart, and it touched me a lot. And I think from my old stories I have heard of cousins and relatives, the next generation will be better. For children and teenagers, they are adopted to the new culture, but for parents, for people who are somehow old, it's difficult for them. So hopefully next generation or next decade will be better for Europe and for all the country in the Middle East. And I hope that all the countries will focus on children, on educating kids and teenagers how to be member of human or international community, or I like your expression, moral community. Thank you a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Brief, please.
Just an easy question. You said do unto others. I know that's in Islam and Christianity. Which other religions practice do unto others?
I was referring to Christian religion, and to Islam, and to the Jewish religion. These are the three monotheist religions in which there's included already both the golden rule and the right to just war, having just war.
But I don't think it's in Hinduism or Buddhism. It's not in other religions. I haven't heard in other religions.
Okay, more or less it's included in nearly every religion. Even Buddhism does have some reference to you have the right to. You need not just let it happen that you are getting killed. Would be very strange.
And Tom, you mentioned Tom quickly. Can you tell us what's his origin in Germany?
What was it? I'm sorry.
Tom in Germany.
Okay. That would be another story.
Final questions.
I'd like to thank you again for this lecture. For me, I really enjoyed it, and it's a bit of a question, a confused remark in a bit, because it sort of struck me that the first principle of Vellman's argument is that a legitimate state is one that recognizes and protects human rights. And that for me is a very Eurocentric understanding of legitimacy, because if we look in international law at the way that states are recognized in the international community, or what are the elements of statehood, you'd look at having a territory, a population, permanent population, a government with a monopoly on the use of violence. So this idea of having a state being legitimate because it actually protects human rights is a very Eurocentric idea of statehood.
Does this mean that the entire argument is again very Eurocentric? There is not a universal ethical argument? Can it be understood in different ways? That's it.
You're absolutely right that here lies a big problem. And of course I was reconstructing some philosophy as I have read it and as we had discussed it in the context of this workshop. But it was not time enough to go into at least some of these authors in more details. If we would have had more time and if we would have just now another workshop which would take us for another week, let's say, then I would propose to enter here, yeah, it's a very essential point. And perhaps you have already seen that the cube I had given as a gift to my colleague. Yeah. There are some distinctions, very essential distinctions missing, I guess. And so you question, well, isn't there, it's a more or less Eurocentric question, is quite to the center of what philosophers should have to discuss. But unfortunately, they did not have discussed these questions up to now, with one big exception, namely Cole, who was the figure I was referring to in the last reconstruction. He was opposing Wellman. Yeah? He was pro-open borders. And he says, well, the way we are leading the way we are making our discussion is so narrow-minded. We are taking the states as being given. We are taking their right for exclusion as just as being taken as given. We don't ask the most important philosophical question: should we take it for given, or should we put it into question? And of course, a philosopher, the main job is a philosopher just is to put things in questions nobody other dares to put into question. And that's why I'm so happy that I have to fight for freedom of thought by my own profession, and that's exactly the way we should do it. But I subscribe to the critical moment, critical aspect of your questions. You are right. But read some, this contribution of Cole in the book mentioned by me, and you will find the same point. And he of course says, okay, in order to get a solution in the long run, or as you say, when looking for the next generations, and of course we should do it. That's our future and our only hope. Yeah? That things might be better. If we would not hope for improvements, okay, our meaning would have no, our life would have no meaning. That's one of the things we had discussed today, Marianne. Okay, I think
thank you very much. I have two ideas that I'd like to ideas which are suggested by your magnificent lecture. But before I expose these ideas, I'd like to comment on what has just been said. Because unless something is really lost on me, I do not understand why respect of the right to life, of the right not to be tortured, of the right to food, of the right to housing should be a Eurocentric concept. Why? If someone can convince me that the right not to torture, not to be tortured, is permitted under other horizons than Europe, then I will subscribe to what is said. But frankly, I do not see what is Eurocentric in respecting privacy, in having the right to a fair trial, in having